Chapter 1: The Audit. It started with a decline. Vanessa stood at the boutique register, her arms full of donation thank you gifts, embroidered linens, a few delicate tea sets, tokens for the foundation's upcoming silent auction. She handed the platinum card to the cashier without thinking. Declined. The second time, she laughed it off. Try again? But the screen flashed red once more. The girl behind the counter gave a polite, practiced smile. Would you like to try another card? Vanessa nodded, reaching for her backup. But the moment she stepped outside, bags crinkling in her arms, the warmth drained from her chest. Something wasn't right. By the time she got to her car, she was already calling her private banker. Mrs. Caldwell, the woman answered smoothly. How can I help you today? There's a problem with my account. A pause. Then, which account? That was the moment. The pivot. Because Vanessa only had one card linked to her personal account and one, carefully partitioned, tied to her family trust. The trust was sacred, locked, guarded by layers of legal agreements and a legacy of caution. But something had moved. In the next hour, Vanessa would learn the truth in pieces, that a series of withdrawals had been made over the last 4 months, that access credentials had changed, that a new contact number had been added to the secure portal. Not hers. She drove home in silence. Her hands shook as she logged in from her office desktop. The numbers didn't lie. Over $200,000. Gone. Not to spending accounts, to shell accounts. Small businesses with names like Blue Glass Holdings and Andover Dynamics. She stared at one transaction dated 3 weeks prior. It had cleared just before Mason whisked her away for a spontaneous weekend in Jackson Hole. She'd been flattered. Now it made her nauseous. Her gaze landed on the corner of a framed photo. Her and Mason, champagne flutes raised, the words power couple burned in gold beneath the glass. She reached for it and turned it face down. This wasn't just a decline, it was an alert. And Vanessa Lynn Caldwell was no stranger to audits. This time, she was running one herself. Chapter 2: The Invisible Signature. Vanessa waited until after dinner. Mason had grilled salmon, his new thing since hiring that nutritionist, and was in his usual post-meal mode, swirling wine and scrolling through his phone. He laughed at something, probably a meme from that group chat he never let her see. She let the silence stretch. Then, without raising her voice, she asked, Do you know what Blue Glass Holdings is? Mason looked up mid-sip. Is that a spa? She didn't laugh. It's listed on a transaction tied to my trust account, along with something called Andover Dynamics. He blinked, furrowing his brow. Never heard of them. Is this something your dad's handling? You know how he loves his shell companies. He hasn't touched the trust since I took over management 3 years ago. There was a beat, the first hesitation. I'm sure there's an explanation, he said, his voice taking on that well-practiced, easy tone he used with donors and brunch guests. Maybe it's just a misclassification? Those trust reports are impossible to read unless you're a forensic accountant. I had one look at it, she replied. Actually, 2. His glass paused midair. Vanessa stood and walked over to the bar cart, retrieving a manila folder she'd tucked behind the cocktail mixers. This came in today. She laid the printout in front of him. A transfer authorization form, full legal formatting, complete with trust identification numbers. Signed, Vanessa Lynn Caldwell, dated 5 weeks ago. Notarized in San Diego. Mason, she said evenly, where were we 5 weeks ago? He frowned. Aspen? Exactly. He leaned in, squinting at the document. Well, maybe it's a clerical error. You sign dozens of forms a month. Maybe someone copied your signature. I already checked the notary's registry. She logs video backups. I've requested the footage. Mason leaned back, tone cooling. Vanessa, are you seriously accusing me of, financial fraud? Against your own family? I'm not accusing anyone, she said. I'm collecting facts. She held his gaze. Steady. His jaw twitched. I think you're tired, he muttered. You've been under a lot of pressure lately. The auction, the foundation dinners, people are watching you. Maybe you're overreacting. I'm perfectly calm, she said, and this isn't an overreaction. She slid the folder back into her bag. This is a warning. He smirked, but his eyes didn't match. Is this about control? Because if you think I'd steal from you... You didn't steal from me, she cut in. You stole from the Lynn family trust, which means you didn't just forge my name, you triggered a clause you clearly didn't read. She rose, gathering her things. Vanessa, he said more forcefully now, let's not blow this out of proportion. We're a team. She turned at the doorway. Then you won't mind if I verify everything. And just like that, the air changed. She walked out without another word. Mason didn't follow. Chapter 3, The Setup. Vanessa didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't hurl accusations. Instead, she smiled at brunch. She nodded at committee meetings. She hosted a midweek wine night for the gala planning team and complimented Mason's tailored jacket when he left for his advisory lunches. But behind the curtain, things had already shifted. She made her first call to Lydia Kwan, the Lin family's general counsel. Lydia answered on the first ring. "Something's off," Vanessa said quietly, pacing the back patio, "and I need you to help me make sure I'm not imagining it." That night, Vanessa moved to the guest room. Mason didn't ask why. The next morning, she met with a forensic accountant, a soft-spoken man named Ron, who wore mismatched socks and carried a legal pad full of notes before she even sat down. "I've seen signatures like this before," he said, flipping open a file. "Clever, but not clean. Someone rushed it." Vanessa didn't flinch. "Can you track the withdrawals?" "I already started," he said. "Some of the money was routed through a dummy LLC in Florida. It's been dissolved now, but the records aren't fully scrubbed." She took a breath. "And Mason's name?" Ron shrugged. "Not yet, but you give it a week, maybe less. I'll have what you need." Vanessa returned home that night and kissed Mason on the cheek like nothing had changed. He smiled, charmed as ever. "How was your day?" "Productive," she said, removing her earrings. "Yours?" He launched into a story about a client dinner, a new consulting lead, some startup in Austin. She nodded in all the right places. But while he talked, she watched his hands. Soft, manicured. No calluses, no real wear, just like her father warned. That night, she made a second call, this time to Lydia again. "I want to invoke the audit clause," Vanessa said. There was silence on the line. "You're sure?" Lydia asked. Vanessa stood at the window, watching Mason's reflection in the kitchen as he poured himself a scotch. "I'm sure," she said. And for the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. Chapter 4, The Clauses He Forgot. The audit results landed on Vanessa's desk 4 days later, quietly and in a plain white envelope. Ron's summary was clipped to the front. Flagged for breach of fiduciary ethics. Potential criminal liability. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she brewed herself a cup of tea, walked down the hallway to the den, and stood in the doorway while Mason reclined on the sofa, half listening to a finance YouTuber droning about decentralized real estate funds. He muted the screen when he saw her. "Hey, what's up?" Vanessa held the envelope at her side. "Do you remember the prenup?" That got his attention. Mason sat up slightly. "Well, that's a mood shift. Why?" "I was rereading it last night," she said, voice even. "There's a clause I'd forgotten about, or maybe you did." He looked at her warily. "Which one?" "Clause 14, misuse of trust assets. Specifically, if either party manipulates or accesses funds belonging to the Lin family trust without proper authorization." She paused, letting the weight settle. "They forfeit all future financial claims, retroactively," he scoffed. "Vanessa, we both know your father tried to get that in early, but our lawyer struck it from the final version. I remember this." She stepped further into the room. "I double-checked. Turns out it did make the final draft, quietly inserted, probably by Lydia. It's there, signed and sealed. I can send you the PDF if you want." Mason's jaw clenched. "Even if it is, it's not enforceable. That kind of clause wouldn't hold up in court." Vanessa placed the envelope on the coffee table, gently, like it was a loaded weapon. "Then you won't mind if we test that." He didn't pick it up. She gave him a patient smile. "I'd suggest reading it carefully. Ron was thorough." She turned to leave but paused in the doorway. "Oh, and you should know. He traced the withdrawals to a fake LLC, one that's been funneling money for over a year." "Fake?" Mason asked, stunned. "Which one?" "Blue Glass Holdings, among others." He blinked. "That's not mine." Vanessa tilted her head. "No, because your email's on the Articles of Incorporation. You used your office address, and the recovery contact is your secondary Gmail, the one you used for fantasy football." The room fell silent. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said finally. "But if you go public with this, it'll embarrass your family just as much." She nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe, but they'll survive a few headlines. You, on the other hand, you'll survive bankruptcy." He didn't answer. Back in her room, Vanessa finally opened the envelope. Ron's full report was meticulous. He'd traced multiple transfers, some as small as $2,300, others nearly $50,000, routed through temporary accounts linked to fabricated consulting invoices. The audit noted Mason's pattern. Short-term shell entities formed just long enough to authorize a few withdrawals, then closed before detection. But the most damning part wasn't the movement of money. It was the joint account, opened using both their names and linked to a business that didn't exist. A business Mason registered using her maiden name as the primary partner. There it was, in black and white, signature mismatches, time-stamped login IPs, and email confirmations. Enough to trigger Clause 14. Enough to nullify everything Mason thought he'd get in a divorce. Enough to start dismantling him, quietly, legally, and completely. Vanessa closed the folder, exhaled once, and smiled. Tomorrow she would begin, and this time she would leave nothing in his name. Chapter 5, The Ghost Account. Vanessa woke up before sunrise. She didn't hit snooze, didn't scroll, just rose, showered, and pulled on a soft black sweater. In the mirror, she looked sharper than she felt, eyes alert, jaw set. Today was for action. She arrived at Lydia Kwan's downtown office just after 8. The city hadn't fully stirred yet. The traffic was light, the sidewalks still damp from the early sprinkler cycles. Lydia greeted her with a quiet nod and gestured toward the corner conference room, already set with printouts, a laptop, and one large monitor. Ron sent over the final trace logs this morning, Lydia said, clicking the screen to life. This is what we were waiting on. We found something bigger than we expected. Vanessa leaned in. The monitor displayed a familiar bank interface, except this one bore both her name and Mason's. Joint ownership, a shared signature. When did this account open? Vanessa asked. Lydia tapped her pen. 10 months ago, but it was funded with small amounts at first, just enough to stay under internal flag thresholds. Then 3 months ago it spiked. How much? Roughly $387,000 across 14 transfers, all linked to fake consulting fees. Vanessa exhaled slowly. And the company? Registered to you, but with a fake business license. We're investigating who notarized it, if anyone did. The shell company was named Haven Bridge Strategies. Looks impressive, doesn't exist. And the email on file? Mason's. He used a variation of your maiden name to file. Vanessa sat back, absorbing the screen. So he tried to make it look like I was moving the money, Lydia nodded. But he was sloppy. He logged into the banking portal from your home IP address, twice, same device as his fitness tracker. Jesus, Vanessa muttered. He wanted to bury me with my own family's money. Not anymore, Lydia said. You ready to move? Vanessa nodded. Everything. Today. That afternoon, she met with the Trust's internal audit committee and filed formal revocation papers. The house, no longer in Mason's name. The access cards, deactivated. The lawyers, activated. By nightfall, Mason's phone would light up with locked accounts and legal notifications. Vanessa poured herself a single glass of Barolo and stood by the window. It was quiet outside, but inside she felt something new. Clear, tomorrow she would serve him. Tonight she savored the last night he'd sleep thinking he was still winning. Chapter 6. Her Father's Warning. The day she served Mason, Vanessa wore white. Not ivory, not cream. White, crisp, clean, and sharp at the collar, like a signal flare no one could miss. She walked into Lydia's office with the same poise she'd practiced for years at galas and fundraisers. But today her posture didn't perform. It declared. He's been notified, Lydia said, sliding her phone across the table. Signature confirmed on delivery. Emergency filings are active. The house, the vehicles, the corporate shares all moved under your sole trust authority. Vanessa nodded but didn't smile. There was still a ringing in her ears, something between adrenaline and fury. Lydia poured her a glass of water. Do you want to talk to your father before the press release goes out? Vanessa stared out the office window, the skyline blurred by midday haze. No, he told me everything I needed to know years ago. She could still hear his voice, gravel and silk. Men like Mason don't always steal with force. They steal with charm, with warmth, with that look that makes you feel safe right before they take your keys. He'd said it at the ranch when she brought Mason home the first time. Her father had grilled him about the software company he'd launched, the fundraising round he claimed to close, the advisory board he name-dropped. Then later, in private, If he ever touches the principal, you touch the lawyers. That's the rule. At the time, Vanessa had rolled her eyes. She thought her father was being dramatic, another cold warning from a man who trusted no one but contracts and cattle. But now she saw it for what it was, a gift. A warning wrapped in love, and she hadn't forgotten it. She turned back toward Lydia. Send the press release. Let him spin all he wants. This time I have the paperwork. Lydia smirked. It's already drafted. Vanessa took one last sip of water, then stood. Outside, her phone buzzed. Mason. Again. She let it ring. Then she powered it off. Let the silence answer him. Chapter 7. The quiet exit. Mason didn't know he'd been locked out until his keycard blinked red at the front gate of the Lynn family estate. He frowned, tried again. Still red. His jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone and tapped the app for the smart lock, only to be met with a blank login screen. Session expired, it read. When he tried to re-authenticate, the message changed. No active access privileges. What the hell? He muttered. Then he hit the call button by the gate. Nothing. At that moment, a black sedan with tinted windows was parked down the block. Inside, Vanessa sat in the back seat, angled just enough to see the estate gate from behind a pair of oversized sunglasses. Lydia sat beside her, scrolling through emails. Vanessa watched in silence as Mason pressed the button again. His confusion was visible even from a distance. The frantic gestures, the impatient pacing, the disbelieving stare at his own phone. You don't have to watch, Lydia said quietly. I know, Vanessa replied. I want to. Mason looked smaller somehow, less polished. His shirt collar was creased, his hair too styled like he was still trying to perform for a world that no longer cared. He called her phone. Vanessa let it ring. When he tried texting, she powered it off. He stood at the gate for another full minute, then 2. Then, with a flash of anger, turned on his heel and marched back to the car, slamming the door harder than necessary. Only when he drove off did Vanessa finally look away. Let's go, she said. By the time Mason made it downtown to his co-working space, a plain envelope was waiting on his desk. No name on the front, but the initials stamped in wax, LK, told him exactly who it came from. He ripped it open. Inside, formal separation filings, financial forensics, evidence of shell accounts, forgery, and false documents. Every move he thought had been clever was now outlined in cold, precise legal language. There was also a letter. Not from Vanessa, from the Lynn Family Trust's internal counsel. Effective immediately, all access has been revoked. You are advised to cease and desist all attempts to contact any Lynn family members, associates, or representatives. Further legal action is pending. Mason slumped into the chair. Vanessa wasn't celebrating. She was already gone. That morning, she'd checked out of the house with nothing but a small overnight bag and a thumb drive. Now she sat in the corner of Lydia's quiet conference lounge, sipping espresso and staring out over the harbor. Think he's read it yet? Lydia asked from across the table. Vanessa didn't answer. She didn't need to. This wasn't revenge. This was removal. And Mason was no longer part of her equation. Chapter 8. Mason's Spin. Mason didn't disappear. He adapted. Less than 24 hours after being locked out, he was already playing defense in the only arena he knew how to manipulate: perception. First came the Instagram story. A black and white photo of a whiskey glass, a melancholy playlist playing in the background, and a single caption: Sometimes the people you fight hardest for turn into strangers. Then the posts, highly curated. Mason in a linen shirt on a rooftop terrace. Mason at brunch. Mason walking through a bookstore looking thoughtful, a quote from Rumi beneath the image. The aesthetic was moody, deliberate. It begged for engagement. And it got it. Old college friends flooded the comments. You okay, man? If you ever want to talk, I'm here. Didn't think she'd do something like this. Mason didn't respond directly, but his next caption was clear enough. There's nothing more exhausting than being painted as the villain in someone else's healing story. He even reached out to a podcast host he knew, someone he'd quietly funded back when the show was still small. Within days, he appeared on a new episode titled Love, Control, and Losing Everything Overnight. He spun a clean narrative. He'd been blindsided, his accounts frozen without warning. His wife, influenced by her family, had turned cold. No mention of the trust. No mention of the shell accounts. No mention of the forged documents. We stopped being partners a long time ago, he told the host, voice heavy with crafted sadness. But I guess I was the last to notice. Vanessa listened to exactly 90 seconds of it before turning it off. Lydia raised an eyebrow. Want me to send a rebuttal to the podcast? Vanessa shook her head. No need. He's setting himself up. Let him talk. And talk Mason did. But for every new post, there were private messages, quiet questions, texts from mutual acquaintances who had seen the filings, the audit, the receipts. One message stood out. Is he seriously trying to flip this on you? I saw the docs. That man committed wire fraud. Another, he showed up at Leo's party last night, kept saying you froze him out, but the vibe was weird. People are starting to put it together. Vanessa didn't respond to any of them. Instead, she sent a single line to Lydia. Let's cue the receipts. Lydia responded with a thumbs up and a Dropbox link. The quiet part was almost over. Now came the loud truth. Chapter 9, The Receipts. Mason woke up to chaos. It started with a missed call from his publicist, followed by a flurry of texts. Bro, what is this? Did you see her IG story? Delete your podcast app now. He sat up in bed, heart hammering. He hadn't even touched his phone in hours. Whatever had happened was already done. He opened Instagram and tapped on Vanessa's profile. There, pinned to the top of her story highlights, was a new reel titled simply Receipts. It opened with a screen-recorded scroll through a financial audit. Mason's name was on every page. The music was subtle, classical, but the visuals, brutal. A forged signature compared side by side with Vanessa's real one. A PDF of a document dated 3 months earlier, authorizing a $120,000 transfer into a shell company with a name almost identical to a real vendor. The kicker? The company didn't exist. Then came screenshots from group chats. Mason mocking Vanessa. She's too busy playing trust fund Barbie to notice. Easy to fake a signature when she's always signing crap without reading. Then the audio clips. Mason, laughing with a friend. If this goes well, I won't need her or her family anymore. Another clip, nastier. They treat me like a kept man? Fine, I'll cash the checks and bounce when I'm ready. Vanessa didn't speak over any of it. She didn't have to. The footage ended with a single slide. Manipulation wears many suits. Here's what one looks like when it unravels. Quiet exit. Financial abuse. Forgery isn't love. But that wasn't all. At 11:45 a.m., Vanessa posted again. This time a carousel. Photo 1. A framed copy of the prenup clause highlighting the forfeiture of financial claims upon proven misuse of trust funds. Photo 2. A statement from her family's lawyer affirming that the trust had been fully restored and secured. Photo 3. A text message thread. Mason trying to charm his way back just 2 weeks ago. Babe, let's not get lawyers involved. You know we can fix this. Her reply, left unread. By noon, the story had over 300,000 views. Influencers shared it. Former classmates sent her messages of support. One even tweeted, Vanessa just dropped the quietest mic I've ever seen. Mason tried to respond. A Notes app apology quickly deleted. A live video he cut halfway through. Too many questions in the comments. Too many people asking for explanations he couldn't spin fast enough. He'd spent so much time trying to control the story. Now the story was writing itself. And Vanessa wasn't done yet. Chapter 10. The Deposition. The conference room was stark. No windows, just 4 walls, 2 cameras, and a long rectangular table with a pitcher of untouched water in the center. Mason sat at one end, flanked by his attorney, a junior associate who looked barely old enough to rent a car. He adjusted his cufflinks and offered a half smile to the court reporter. Vanessa sat across from him, expression unreadable. To her right, Lydia. To her left, Jeremy Tran, a seasoned deposition attorney who'd once dismantled a hedge fund CEO in under 3 hours. He came recommended by her father. Mason tried to start light. So formal. Could have just grabbed coffee, Ness. Jeremy didn't blink. Let's begin. The camera light blinked red. Jeremy leaned forward. Mr. Caldwell, were you aware that the trust documents specifically prohibit use of trust assets for investment in third-party ventures without board approval? Mason shifted. I wasn't aware the business account was linked to the trust. And yet, Jeremy said, sliding a printout across the table, this is your signature on the registration paperwork for Lynn Caldwell Holdings? Mason stared at it. The font, the header, the ink line that curved just a little too sharply. It was his signature, just not one he remembered giving. That was preliminary paperwork. Vanessa spoke for the first time. You opened it with money from my trust, then used it to pay for that co-working lease and your podcast production deal. Mason blinked. That was under 5 figures. Lydia cut in. The audit says otherwise. The questions kept coming. Dates, wire transfers, Mason's personal Venmo history. And then Jeremy asked, were you aware that under California statute, forged financial documents carry criminal penalties even in civil family matters? Silence. Mason reached for the water. His hand trembled. Outside the room, Vanessa's phone buzzed. It was her father. Judge Yuen just got your motion. He's expedited. Things were about to move faster than Mason ever expected. Chapter 11. One clause too far. Vanessa sat alone in the sunroom, legs curled beneath her, the morning light pooling at her feet. The deposition had left her emotionally wrung out, but she knew Mason wasn't done. Not really. People like him never went quietly. The email came at 8:03 a.m., subject line, Urgent Business Licensing Inquiry. She clicked it without hesitation. It was from a friend at the Secretary of State's office. An informal heads-up. A new business registration had come across their desk late the night before. LCH Wellness and Lifestyle Consulting. Registered under 2 names, Mason Caldwell and Evelyn Lynn. Her mother. Vanessa's heart stilled. Not because Mason had tried again, but because he was getting sloppier. He'd named the fake LLC something glossy and vague, but the registration details were clear. He'd used an address affiliated with the Lynn estate, and a secondary contact number that hadn't been active in years. Evelyn's old line. He really thought I wouldn't see this, she murmured. She dialed Lydia. I need a full check on this new LLC. See who he's contacted and if there's been any movement on banking or contracts. Already ahead of you, Lydia said. And there's more. He reached out to my firm's wellness PR affiliate, offered to be a consultant for luxury lifestyle brand expansions, claimed Evelyn Lynn was backing it. Vanessa's voice dropped to a low chill. He used my mother as bait. That night, Vanessa didn't call her attorney. She called Mason. He picked up on the second ring, his voice falsely casual. Didn't expect to hear from you. You went too far. A pause. You tried to forge a brand under my mother's name. You just activated Clause 17. Vanessa, come on, I didn't even use real contact info. You used her name. She let the silence stretch. There is no walking that back. Not this time. Then she hung up and dialed her attorney. Chapter 12. The Judgment. The courtroom wasn't packed. But it didn't have to be. Judge Yuen presided with the same calm intensity Vanessa remembered from her father's board hearing 3 years prior. A woman in her mid-60s, her reputation was spotless, measured, incisive, and unshakably fair. Vanessa sat beside Jeremy, perfectly composed in a navy sheath dress. Lydia was behind her. Her parents were absent by design. They didn't want optics of family intimidation. This was Vanessa's moment. Mason arrived 10 minutes late. Disheveled. Alone. He looked thinner, sweating. The buttons of his dress shirt strained slightly at the chest like he'd borrowed something one size too small. Sorry, Your Honor, he mumbled. Judge Yuen barely glanced up. Let's proceed. Jeremy opened with the audit summary, then the video reel, then the forged documents presented alongside affidavits from the Lynn family financial officer. Mr. Caldwell knowingly opened 2 business entities using trust assets under false pretenses, Jeremy said. He also misrepresented his standing to third parties, claimed endorsement from Evelyn Lynn, and attempted to leverage that name for personal gain. Mason's attorney tried to object, but Judge Yuen held up a hand. Mr. Caldwell, do you dispute the authenticity of these materials? He paused. No, Your Honor. Do you understand the ramifications of Clause 17 in your prenuptial agreement? His mouth opened, closed. I didn't think she'd enforce it, he muttered. The courtroom was still. Judge Yuen looked at Vanessa. Mrs. Caldwell, do you wish to proceed with full enforcement of the prenuptial clauses as outlined? Vanessa met Mason's eyes. Yes, fully. The gavel struck once. Then it is so ordered. Mr. Caldwell is hereby stripped of any financial claim to Lynn family assets, present or future. All accounts shall revert to Mrs. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell is also barred from using the Lynn family name in any form for any business, personal, or representational endeavor. Mason didn't speak. He didn't look up. When the hearing ended, he was still sitting there. The chair creaked as Vanessa stood, but her footsteps made no sound. Chapter 13. Exit Interview. The request came through Mason's lawyer. one final meeting. Not to renegotiate, there was nothing left to bargain for, but to speak, off record, on camera. Vanessa agreed, but only under her terms. They met at a neutral location, a small private media studio in Culver City. No handlers, no attorneys, just 2 chairs, 2 clip-on mics, and a single fixed camera. Vanessa arrived early. She wore black, no makeup except for clear gloss. She looked calm, expensively so. Mason walked in 10 minutes later, eyes darting around like someone checking for exits. He wore a blazer, jeans, and the same charm he always fell back on when nervous. The silence stretched until the tech gave them the signal. The camera rolled. Vanessa didn't waste time. "I need you to hear this without deflection, denial, or fake surprise," she said. "You used me. You used my name, my family's legacy, and my trust, and I think you honestly believed you could keep getting away with it." Mason shifted. "I made mistakes." She held up a hand. "Don't." He stopped. "I loved you, but you didn't love me. Not really. You loved proximity. You loved perception. You loved what I could give you access to. That isn't partnership, that's extraction." Mason looked down at his hands. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't care if you did. That's worse." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you even know the first moment I realized you weren't on my side?" He looked up, uncertain. "It was my birthday, the first year we were married. You left early to meet a client, but I found the receipt for that wine bar you went to. You toasted to my last name." His eyes flickered. Guilt, maybe just recognition. "You've always wanted the trappings, Mason. The invitations, the dinners, the brand collabs, but none of the weight, none of the responsibility." Silence. She let it breathe, then stood. "This is the last time we'll speak, the last time you get to use me as a mirror to feel real." She turned and walked out, heels clicking on the polished concrete. Mason stayed seated, staring into the lens, still trying to find a version of himself worth defending. Chapter 14. Gone overnight. Mason returned to the house at precisely 8:04 a.m., not because he expected a warm welcome, but because the judge's order gave him until noon to retrieve whatever he could carry in a single trip. He pulled into the driveway with a rented cargo van, clearly hoping to grab more than just a suitcase, but the keypad on the gate didn't work. The house, their house, looked different already. No planters, no welcome mat, the curtains drawn. The buzz of landscapers had stopped weeks ago, and now the front hedges looked deliberately unkempt. He buzzed the call box. Nothing. He tried again. Still nothing. Then a low beep and the gate clicked open. He exhaled and drove up slowly, noting the absence of the marble sculpture Vanessa once hated, but kept anyway, just to keep the peace. Inside, the air was too still. The echo of his own steps chased him across the foyer. Boxes? None. Photos? Gone. He stepped into the kitchen, empty, cabinets bare, not even a fork left behind. He walked the halls like a ghost in someone else's home. Everything had been erased. The closet held a single envelope taped to the inside of the door. His name, in Vanessa's handwriting. Inside, one copy of the court order, one check labeled Final Reimbursement, Utilities, and a post-it note. Try not to spend it all in one place. By the time the movers he'd hired showed up, there was nothing left to take. Vanessa was already gone. The deed had transferred, the utilities canceled, the alarm code changed, even the neighbors wouldn't make eye contact. He stood in the empty living room for 22 minutes before leaving. No bags, no boxes, just silence, and the sting of being completely, perfectly left behind. Epilogue. Quiet luxury. Vanessa didn't move far. She didn't need to, not when the entire city had changed around her. Her new place was tucked into a quiet pocket of Brentwood. Single-story, mid-century bones, all clean lines and shadowed corners. No gate, no valet, just her and the trees. She parked in the gravel drive, stepped out in flats, and carried a cloth bag with lemon, arugula, and a fresh loaf of sourdough from the market down the hill. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. Inside, the walls were warm oak. The kitchen, minimalist. Light spilled through floor-to-ceiling windows and painted the living room gold. She placed the bread on the counter, then walked to the back patio where a wrought iron table sat waiting. One black notebook lay open beside a cup of chamomile tea. Her pen rested exactly where she'd left it. Vanessa sat, wrote 2 words, paused, then added 3 more. She smiled to herself, not because the sentence was good, but because it belonged to her. Later that week, she received a letter from Mason's latest lawyer. threats, grievances, an attempt to reopen negotiations. She didn't bother reading the rest. She forwarded it to Jeremy with a one-line message, "You know what to do." He did. 3 weeks later, Mason's lawyer withdrew from the case. Vanessa never heard from them again. She kept writing, sometimes in the morning, sometimes under stars. The money was still there, untouched, growing. But it wasn't the victory. The silence was.
Thanks so much for watching. If you love a good revenge story, or if you've ever dreamed of getting the last word without saying much at all, you're in the right place. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new savage ending. Because around here, karma always hits different.